Reports now estimate that more than 2,000 Iranians have been killed by the regime over the past few days, but the protests aren't stopping. They're continuing to spread across the country.
Unrest across Iran is escalating as the regime cracks down on government protests amid a major internet blackout. 70 people have reportedly been killed and thousands more are detained.
Smoke pours through Iranian streets like a signal flare that cannot be ignored. Entire districts are choked with it, while chants hammer the night across 31 provinces and 185 cities without pause. More than 500 demonstrations are estimated to have erupted, not sequentially, but almost at once, as if triggered by a single command. Among the most explosive developments is the report that one of Ali Khamenei's homes was set on fire by protesters. This was not vandalism and not random rage. It was a message delivered in flames. For decades, power flowed in one direction, downward and absolute. That order is now collapsing in real time. What is unfolding is no longer protest culture or cyclical unrest. It is confrontation. It is escalation. It is a population signaling that fear has changed sides and that sacred lines are no longer protected. The streets no longer behave like crowds. They behave like networks. Protesters are not just gathering, they are hunting. What has emerged resembles controlled urban warfare, low in visibility but sharp in intent. Instead of chanting and dispersing, groups are mapping power, identifying individuals, tracking movements, and exposing homes. Unverified but consistent reports indicate that Revolutionary Guard commanders and senior officials accused of ordering civilian killings are being identified one by one. Their doors are marked, their addresses circulate. This is not symbolism, this is targeting. The regime's old system of intimidation, blacklists, and silent punishment has been seized and reversed. The same methods once used to erase opponents are now being aimed back at the architects of repression. This shift has injected a lethal edge into the uprising, transforming collective anger into personal reckoning. That reckoning is already drawing blood. In several regions, the tension has crossed a threshold where restraint no longer exists. Individual confrontations are replacing mass standoffs, and the consequences are increasingly deadly. Yet the most destabilizing shock is not coming from the protesters at all. It is coming from inside the institutions meant to crush them. The army, long portrayed as loyal and disciplined, is cracking. A video circulating widely, reportedly recorded months earlier, shows an Iranian army colonel in uniform announcing his break from the regime. He describes the system as illegitimate and occupying, then declares loyalty to the lion and sun flag tied to Iran's pre-revolutionary identity. This alone would be damaging. What follows is devastating. According to the colonel, roughly 50,000 high-ranking officers have secretly aligned themselves with a national cooperation effort associated with Reza Pahlavi. If this claim holds, the regime is already hollow. 50,000 officers are not a fringe. They are the spine of command and control. That number is sufficient to stall deployments, delay orders, and neutralize entire divisions without open mutiny. It explains why armored units hesitate, why commands are ignored, and why suppression efforts appear clumsy and uneven. An army does not collapse when soldiers defect loudly. It collapses when they quietly stop obeying. What looks like confusion may actually be coordination through refusal. Events on the ground support this picture. In multiple cities, army units have withdrawn instead of engaging. In others, police reportedly managed traffic to open escape routes rather than seal off protesters. These are not accidents, these are decisions. Rumors persist that certain units are standing by, waiting for a signal rather than acting on current orders. This silent pause is lethal for any authoritarian system. While the leadership clings to the illusion of control, the machinery beneath it is locking up. Barracks are no longer reliable. Chains of command are compromised. The fire that reached Khamenei's home is not just physical, it is institutional. The regime is discovering too late that power means nothing when those ordered to enforce it no longer believe in it. As the streets harden, the balance of fear continues to flip. The intelligence network built by protesters is no longer theoretical. It is active, operational, and increasingly lethal. In the Malik Shahi area of Alam province, reports state that the home of Revolutionary Guard Colonel Mehdi Rahim was identified after he was accused of responsibility for the killing of 10 civilians. Shortly after his residence was exposed, an attack allegedly followed, ending with his death during a clash. There was no investigation, no court, no delay. The street delivered its own verdict. This moment matters because it marks a psychological point of no return. Authority was not challenged through slogans or marches. It was confronted directly at the source. The message to the security elite was unmistakable. Rank no longer guarantees safety. Distance from the crowd no longer offers protection. The home, once a sanctuary, has become a liability.
Whose hands are soiled with the blood of the Iranian people. You too will have to face justice.
A similar pattern is rumored to have unfolded in Mashhad, where Brigadier General Javad Kashevars, reportedly tasked with suppressing unrest, was allegedly killed during confrontations with demonstrators. Whether every detail is later confirmed is almost irrelevant. What matters is the effect. These incidents have sent shockwaves through the Revolutionary Guard command structure. Generals who once operated with total impunity are now calculating exit routes, changing routines, and limiting exposure. Fear has moved upward. The loss of even a small number of senior figures destabilizes an organization built on hierarchy and certainty. It also signals that the protest movement has evolved into something disciplined and informed. Maps, addresses, and operational details circulating online suggest coordination rather than chaos. This is not spontaneous rage. This is organized retaliation born from years of suppressed violence. With allegations that between 2,000 and 3,000 civilians have been killed nationwide, the logic of restraint has evaporated. The streets appear to have adopted an eye for an eye approach, not out of ideology, but exhaustion. The last 72 hours alone are described as catastrophic, with losses mounting on all sides. Yet even as violence escalates, the regime's response grows weaker and more divided. This contradiction points back to the fractures inside the state itself. A system cannot enforce terror outward when terror is leaking inward. Every marked door, every exposed address amplifies paranoia within the security apparatus. Officers are no longer asking how to stop the protests. They are asking whether their colleagues will protect them if the order comes to fire again. At the center of this instability stands President Masoud Pezeshkian, whose recent statements have injected further uncertainty into an already fractured system. Appearing on state television, he called for calm, while acknowledging that peaceful protest is a right and that public demands carry legitimacy. This language directly contradicts the hardline narrative labeling protesters as foreign agents and criminals. Analysts interpret this as a calculated move, not empathy. By softening his stance, Pezeshkian appears to be positioning himself for a transition scenario, distancing his image from the bloodshed. He may be acutely aware of the alleged 50,000 officers sympathetic to Reza Pahlavi and understands that survival now depends on flexibility rather than loyalty. His words likely signaled to wavering security forces that hesitation would not be punished. The impact of this shift was visible almost immediately. In several areas of Tehran, police units reportedly retreated or reduced pressure at critical moments, allowing crowds to disperse rather than escalate. This was not an official withdrawal. It was interpretation. Security forces read between the lines and adjusted accordingly. Such signals are dangerous for authoritarian control because they legitimize disobedience without openly endorsing it. Within besieged militia units, morale reportedly dropped further as uncertainty spread. Even those previously loyal began questioning whether enforcement still served their interests. Pezeshkian's gamble may preserve his own position temporarily, but it accelerates fragmentation. When leadership sends mixed messages during crisis, cohesion collapses. The regime is now fighting not just the streets, but its own reflection in the mirror. While internal fractures widen, the external tone has shifted from caution to open confrontation. Reza Pahlavi has abandoned diplomatic phrasing and moved to direct language that leaves little room for interpretation. His recent messages signal that the phase of symbolic resistance is over and that institutional targets are now considered legitimate. He frames embassies, state bodies, and regime infrastructure as property of the people rather than untouchable pillars of power. This is not rhetoric designed to inspire protest alone. It is language aimed at those inside the system who are still undecided. When he urges officials to resign immediately and implies that escape routes may soon close, the message is calculated. It offers one last off-ramp before accountability arrives. For officers already questioning loyalty, this tone validates hesitation and accelerates defection through fear of being left behind. This messaging appears to be circulating quietly inside the military and police. Allegations suggest that Pahlavi's statements are being shared privately among soldiers and junior officers, reinforcing the sense that a parallel authority structure is forming. This silent spread matters more than public speeches. Regimes fall not when opposition speaks loudly, but when insiders start listening. The idea that tens of thousands within the armed forces may already be aligned with a post-regime order transforms every delay into a threat. It means that any crackdown risks triggering refusal, sabotage, or open collapse. The regime's inability to decisively suppress unrest now has a technical explanation. Orders travel downward, but loyalty no longer travels back up. International pressure has sharpened this dilemma. Statements attributed to former United States President Donald Trump and Senator Lindsey Graham have tightened the regime's margin for violence.
We will hit them at levels that they've never been hit before. They won't even believe it.
Trump's warning that continued killing of protesters could trigger intervention constrains escalation. Graham's message that help is on the way hints at non-kinetic support, potentially cyber or communications-based. These signals matter because they feed into calculations inside Iran's security apparatus. Officers weighing obedience against survival must now consider external consequences. If cyber defenses are compromised or communications disrupted, the regime loses its final advantage. A state that cannot coordinate cannot intimidate. The mere possibility of outside interference is enough to freeze decision-making at the top. Meanwhile, attempts to mobilize regime loyalists through state television have failed visibly. Pro-government rallies draw thin crowds, lacking energy and conviction. Cameras linger too long because there is nothing else to show. This absence is itself a message. Legitimacy is not declared, it is demonstrated. The contrast between packed protest corridors and empty loyalty gatherings exposes the regime's isolation. It no longer commands the street, the narrative, or the enthusiasm of its base. What remains is coercion, and coercion requires willing enforcers. Those enforcers are now unreliable. The regime is discovering that control maintained through fear collapses the moment fear loses direction. The most dangerous fracture, however, is unfolding above the streets. Escape is no longer guaranteed. Intelligence claims indicate that radar operators within the Iranian Air Force have begun ignoring no-fly directives issued by Revolutionary Guard Command. This is not a technical glitch. It is deliberate insubordination. Airspace control determines who can leave and who cannot. A dictator can board a plane, but without compliant radar, air traffic control, and air defense coordination, that plane never truly departs. Reports suggest that the skies are no longer under a single authority. This uncertainty is paralyzing. For leadership accustomed to absolute command, not knowing whether jets overhead are friendly is the ultimate nightmare. The path to Moscow, once assumed open, may already be sealed from within. The collapse does not stop in the sky. It spreads into the veins of the state itself. Energy is the regime's bloodstream, and that bloodstream is being cut. While street battles dominate attention, the decisive blow is unfolding quietly in the south, inside oil fields, refineries, and gas valves. Reports from Khuzestan and Bushehr provinces confirm that oil and gas workers have shut down operations under the cover of political strikes. This is not symbolic labor action. This is strategic paralysis. Pressure inside pipelines feeding fuel from the Abadan refinery toward Tehran has reportedly dropped sharply, with flow stopping entirely in several segments. Satellite thermal imagery analyzed by independent observers shows refinery chimneys dark at night, where they should glow intensely. Darkness on those images means shutdown. Shutdown means no exports, no cash, no fuel, and no mobility. Without fuel, the regime's power becomes theater. Armored vehicles cannot move. Police carriers cannot deploy. Aircraft cannot fly. A tank without fuel is scrap metal, and a regime without logistics is already defeated. The same fuel that once sustained repression now fails to reach it. Escape planes sit grounded. Generators fall silent. Every hour of shutdown compounds panic at the top. This is the 2026 version of the oil strikes that helped bring down the Shah in 1979, but with far greater precision and impact. Back then, disruption took weeks. Now it takes days. Modern infrastructure collapses faster, and so does authority built on it. As Tehran burns internally, the regime's so-called axis of resistance is collapsing externally. The silence from Beirut, Damascus, Baghdad, and Sana'a is deafening. The allies who once pledged fire and fury at a single signal are not moving. This is not restraint. It is abandonment. The reason is not ideological. It is financial. Proxy warfare runs on cash, weapons, and logistics. With Iran's oil revenues frozen and its shadow networks disrupted, the money has stopped flowing. Intelligence fragments suggest that Hezbollah fighters in southern Beirut have received partial salaries or none at all for roughly 2 months. An armed movement without pay is not a movement. It is a liability. Loyalty collapses faster than ideology when hunger sets in. Facing this reality, these groups are no longer preparing to defend Tehran. They are preparing to survive its fall. Reports indicate that factions within Hezbollah are hoarding weapons and ammunition, planning for internal chaos or external attack once Iranian support vanishes. In Iraq, the picture is even darker. Militia groups once loyal to Tehran are reportedly ignoring orders and converting weapons depots, mamzahas, and smuggling routes into personal assets. This is not alliance behavior. This is looting a sinking ship. The Shiite crescent built over decades is disintegrating under financial gravity. Power without money cannot command obedience. It can only beg, and Tehran has nothing left to offer. The endgame is no longer theoretical. The regime has lost the streets, the barracks, the skies, the pipelines, and its regional insurance policy. What remains is isolation inside fortified buildings guarded by units that may not fire when ordered. The question is no longer whether collapse is coming, but how it will manifest. Will it fracture suddenly or decay until nothing responds? One truth is already clear. A ruler cannot flee without airspace, cannot rule without fuel, and cannot survive when his own system refuses to function. The uncertainty haunting the leadership now is absolute. When even the instruments of escape are unreliable, power becomes a prison. This is where the story ends, because from this point forward, events no longer belong to planning, but to momentum. Beyond the fire, beyond the streets, the situation inside Iran is now bleeding into the geopolitical arena with explosive new pressures that threaten to widen the crisis even further. In the last hours, global leaders have begun weighing in with language and actions that intensify the stakes for Khamenei's regime, confirming that the unrest is no longer an internal matter alone, but part of a broader international crisis in motion. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has publicly declared that the world must rally in support of the Iranian people, framing the protests as an uprising and calling on international leaders not to squander what he described as a pivotal moment for change within Iran's political order. At the same time, Zelensky sharply criticized Russia's continuing strategic ties with Tehran, especially the transfer of Iranian drones used in Ukraine's war, demanding that Moscow reassess its relationship in light of the deepening turmoil and deadly repression. Since early January, the government has maintained a near-total internet shutdown, cutting access to prevent the world from seeing the scale of unrest and to hinder protest coordination. Monitoring groups confirm that Iran-hosted websites are largely unreachable from outside the country, a drastic step that signals not just censorship, but strategic suppression of information flow at a time when visibility was the protesters' strongest asset. While the blackout conceals much of what is happening, other independent assessments paint a grim picture of mounting casualties, overwhelmed hospitals, and tens of thousands of arrested civilians. This information vacuum also fuels rumors, speculation, and fear, creating an environment where truth battles obscurity on every front. The social impact of the regime's tactics has cut deep into Iranian society itself, provoking public outcry from unlikely sectors. Cultural figures, artists, and intellectuals, some of whom have faced punishment and exile, have joined in condemning the blackout and state repression. Their statements equate the communications clampdown to a deliberate tool of repression that attempts to erase the suffering of the population and hide state violence from the world. These voices, amplified through diaspora communities and international human rights networks, are feeding a global narrative that portrays the uprising as far more than domestic unrest, framing it instead as a fundamental challenge to authoritarianism. The widening chorus of condemnation adds a new psychological front to the protest, one in which legitimacy is not just contested domestically, but condemned internationally. Even within the grim landscape of confrontation, events on the ground continue to escalate in real and tragic ways. Reports now emerging include allegations of targeted killings by regime forces, including cases where families of victims are pressured to obscure the true circumstances of deaths. Incidents like the killing of 2 young brothers by IRGC forces have surfaced, in which authorities reportedly demanded exorbitant payments from the family to release the bodies, attempting to reclassify them as loyal militia members rather than protesters. These stories not only deepen public outrage, but undermine the regime's own narrative of control and legitimacy, showing a leadership increasingly desperate to mask its brutality. Taken together, these developments mark a dramatic new stage in the crisis. The uprising has jumped from streets to international capitals. Economic sanctions are tightening. Internet blackouts have become instruments of repression rather than short-term tactics. Cultural resistance is joining political revolt, and the regime's attempts to conceal its violence are only fueling further outrage. Iran now faces pressures that are structural, ideological, social, and diplomatic all at once. The narrative of collapse, previously speculative, is now being echoed in capitals around the world and on social platforms inside the country itself. In this context, what was once seen as a domestic confrontation has rapidly evolved into a full-blown crisis that could redefine not only Iran's leadership, but its very place in the global order.